And it's magnificent. You know,
Right.
go back into the files and pick out little.
Ed Sullivan smiled at a lot of people every Sunday night. In 1955, though, something blew up and broke him. A young artist changed one song, and Sullivan lost it. He said things that were so shocking that people couldn't believe they were real. He used a racist slur that hurt his reputation, which he had worked hard to build. The fight almost became physical. They had to be kept apart by staff. No one talked about for decades it. The artist was not allowed to play again. But what he did that night on live TV changed the history of rock and roll. Ed Sullivan was born on September 28, 1901, as one half of a twins living in Harlem, New York. Daniel, his twin brother, was sick from birth and only lived for a few months. Ed was the only brother who made it out alive, carrying a grief that cast a dark shadow over his childhood. Even when he was a boy, he felt empty and sad in a quiet way, which shaped him. Peter and Mary, his parents, they were Irish and had a big family. The third of 8 kids, Ed lived, but only 5 made it. Childhood. There was both life and sadness in the house at the same time. When Ed was only 5, there was another terrible event. His little sister died, which hurt the whole family. Once more. Elizabeth gave up because the pain was too much. They were going to leave, she said. Harlem and moved to Portchester, a little town up north of the city. Portchester was more peaceful and calm. They hoped that the change would help them get better. But he never got over the losses. Ed learned how to live even when he was a little boy. With sadness. Ed lived through it all, though, and folks often called him the miracle child. Growing up in an area with both Irish and Jewish families besides that, he grew up with songs and cultures from around the world. Cars began to replace Ed took it all in while riding in a horse-drawn wagon. He was one of 8 children, only 5 of them lived past childhood. Every day showed me that life was broken. The most protective person in his family was his mother. He was to them what a miracle. There was always sadness in the house, but music helped. The rooms were full of sound as the Sullivans sang together around the piano. They dealt with things by making music. That was something Ed would always do. He would still talk about those early days even after he became a famous TV host. And how music could make things feel better. Ed also changed as he aged. Began to show that he needed to be in charge. During high school, he was very good at sports. He got 12 letters in sports from 1916 to 1919. In football, he was a tough halfback. A quick guard on the basketball court. In the track, she is a quick runner. But baseball was where he really shone as captain and catcher. These games made him who he is today. They helped him follow rules and taught him how to be a leader. He also loved being in charge. Ed was the baseball team's captain. Team by telling them what to do and where to stand. Awards A. Titles. His fame grew after that. He felt like he was in charge in that role, something that would help his business even more. At age 17, when the United States joined during the First World War, Ed ran away to Chicago to try to join the Navy. But he was too young and didn't have any papers, so he was sent home. That move that failed who he was bold. It also made him go in a different direction. Ed had by that time also learned to write. At school, he wrote sports articles and edited the school newspaper. After high school, the Portchester Daily Item hired him right away. They gave him $1 for each piece. Ed loved everything about it. The first job he had as a reporter was that one. Would lead him to the Associated Press, the Hartford Post, and the New York Evening Mail. New York Evening Graphic, and then the New York Press. Writing and sports were always things he loved, and they helped him get ready for a much bigger stage. Ed also learned how to be fair through sports. As a child, he played with black kids. Sports without giving it much thought. It seemed right to him. When he went on trips, he went to Connecticut for games and saw teams with black players. He didn't think it was strange. That sense of fairness stayed with him. In the future, when Ed Sullivan had his own TV show, he would give black artists a stage even if other hosts wouldn't. What's on? Thought that going to work for the Hartford Post in 1919 would be a big step up in their job. Coming after leaving the Portchester Daily Item, he hoped to find better work at a bigger paper, but that plan almost didn't work out. Right away. The Hartford Post shut down in his first week on the job. He was out of work before he even had a chance to settle in. It was a weird and bad luck, especially since newspapers were doing so well at the time. Every paper doesn't close after a few days. Sullivan had to check out for work all over again, learning that the world of newspapers could be very unpredictable. He didn't slow down at all, though. Instead, it made him more motivated to keep going. That quick and hard lesson made him strong and driven. Beginning. When the Hartford Post failed, Sullivan was able to get back on his feet and he became a sports writer for the New York Evening Mail. But that paper in 1923 shut down too. This was the start of a rough time when he kept failing. Newspaper to another. From 1923 to 1927, he worked for each of the following: the Morning Telegraph, the Philadelphia Bulletin, the New York Bulletin, and the Leader. Every time a paper ran out, he had to look for a new job. It was a rough cycle, and most people would have given up. Sullivan just wouldn't give up. Every job was a chance to get better. His knowledge and make new connections. Even though it was hard work and unsure, showed how much he loved news. When I worked at the Associated Press, it was even more important. It was well known that the AP was one of the best news organizations in everything. Even though Sullivan kept working as a freelancer for newspapers like the Philadelphia Bulletin and the Morning Telegraph, his job at the AP gave him access to national news and more serious tales job assignments. From this time until 1927, Sullivan learned how to write about everything. Sports to news that just broke. In spite of having to change jobs all the time, he made a name for themselves as someone who could change and tell good stories. He had shown that he was a good reporter by the time he left the AP. He took his next big step that same year. He joined the New. He wrote about sports for the York Evening Graphic. The picture was bright and loud, with a reputation for telling bold and often shocking stories. Sullivan did very well there and went up quickly. He quickly became the sports editor, which was his first stable job as a leader. He also met Walter Winchell at the drawing, who was one of the most well-known news writers at the time. When Winchell left for the Daily Mirror in 1929, Sullivan started writing a piece for Broadway Graphics. That piece put him in touch with the show business and changed the way he thought about things. The comic ended in 1932, but Sullivan was already a name that people already knew. He began writing about Broadway for in 1932. The New York Daily News. That was the start of his well-known piece, Little Old New York. People checked it every day for 42 years, until 1974. He wrote Sullivan about big Broadway shows, famous stars, and the private lives of the city's most famous people stars. His voice was loved by many because it was clear, sharp, and always in the do something. If Sullivan says something about someone, they become famous right away. His people outside of New York could also read the piece, which was syndicated. Sullivan changed it every year. To every new play in the show business. That's what made him successful. Sullivan was also good at finding big stars. Little New York was more than just a place to talk. It was where up-and-coming actors and performers got their big break. That Sullivan knew how to see talent before anyone else does. Just one nice word in his column could get a career going. But if he didn't like someone, a quick remark could hurt someone's reputation. Artists and producers read his column every morning because they knew one line could decide the future of their show. Sullivan did more than just report the news. He was making it happen. Outside of the newspaper, he would be at all the big parties and theater openings, as well as his office. Wherever something happened, Sullivan was there. But the nightlife of New York was its own battleground, too. Sullivan set up shop at the famous El Morocco Club. That became his unofficial headquarters. Across town, his rival, Walter Winchell, held court at the Stork Club. Both men fought for attention in these glitzy spots where movie stars and politicians spent their nights. Every famous face that walked through the doors was part of the challenge. Winchell's store was famous for its strict door policy and exclusive crowd. Sullivan's El Morocco was famous for its beauty and its power. Between them, these two columnists ruled New York's nightlife, and everyone felt their rivalry. It became one of the most talked about there are stories in the city. Being seen at either club could make or break an image, and writing wasn't enough for Sullivan. He also wanted to take over radio, just like Winchell. 2. He started his first radio show, The Ed Sullivan Show, in 1932. CBS. Big names like Jack Benny and others came on that show, which brought him new fans. George M. Cohan. But Sullivan kept going. In 1941, he hosted Ed Sullivan Variety. From 1943 to 1944, and Ed Sullivan's Pipelines from 1946 to 1948. With each show, more people heard his name. Radio worked great for him. It helped him reach more people faster. A way to talk about what's going on in show business. As time went on, people learned to trust his voice. Radio showed that he could do not just write. CBS chose to take a big risk in 1948. Ed was hired to be the star of their new variety show, Toast of the Town, which airs on Sunday nights. Sullivan wrote a piece for a newspaper and had never worked on TV before. The one of Marlo Lewis. The people who work for CBS thought that Sullivan's simple style might work. It wasn't Sullivan, yes, sure. Everything they're promising to do is something I've already done, he said. The first show aired on June 20, 1948, and cost only $1.75 to make. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were paid only $200 to be there. The sponsors were scared. Some executives thought he wasn't flashy enough, but William, the boss of CBS, Paley had faith in him. He fought to get great guests and made the show what it was. For more than 20 years and became a big hit. There was no such thing as success without pain. People didn't like him. They thought it was terrible how he spoke. Harriet Van Horn wrote that he didn't have any personality. Some people said he was stiff, awkward, and useless. Sullivan felt bad about it. He even wrote Van Horn a short, mean letter one time. But people at home read it anyway. Alan King himself made fun of the fact that even though Sullivan didn't do anything, he did it better than anyone else. Sullivan found out how to take it. He let comedians pretend to be him. That made more people like him. People who he liked being able to laugh at himself. Critics laughed, but watchers liked it. They kept coming back. The show became known for Sullivan's strange style. During the video, he looked stressed. He always had a hunched back. His voice was rough. Some people thought he had Bell's palsy. Time magazine said that his smile looked like someone sucking on a lemon. But he wasn't sick or anything. Many people wrote to him to tell him how brave he was. Several comedians copied his wooden moves that helped him become well known. Sullivan never tried to change this picture. In fact, he welcomed it. He was one of the most liked people because he was honest and funny. Famous people in show business. By 1953, the show had moved to CBS Studio, a new place. 50 on Broadway at 1697. The theater was old and was built in 1927. It was very fancy inside, with a Gothic roof and stained glass. It was hard work. So cameras and other gear can fit inside. Even the train that was close had to be blocked off so it wouldn't get in the way. Sullivan liked this stage a lot. In 1967, CBS changed the name to the Ed Sullivan Theater to honor its 20th anniversary. That was a very special award for a TV star. That building is still there today. David afterward, Letterman and Stephen Colbert would call it home, but most people still remember it. It was for Sullivan and all the famous people who played there. At first, people still it was called Toast of the Town. Sullivan thought this didn't praise him enough. People already think of it as his show. CBS changed the name to The Ed Sullivan Show on September 25, 1955. Display. Sullivan cared about that. It showed he was one of the most powerful men on TV. After a year, he would have Elvis Presley on the show. Elvis made $60 million. Seeing. At the time, that was a TV record. That big change and the new name the crowd made Sullivan famous for good. He wasn't always easy, though, to do business with. On November 20, 1955, Bo Diddley was inside the show. I heard Sullivan sing Tennessee Ernie Ford's big hit, 16 Tons. That song made money. In just 3 weeks, it sold more than 1 million copies. Diddley was told by Sullivan to play it. Diddley probably agreed because he thought it would help his business. But when he thought he was supposed to do both when he read Bo Diddley 16 Tons aired. Instead, he played his own song called Bo Diddley. That choice led to one of the most disobedient times in early TV. He was in an R&B group. Part of. The fans went crazy when he played his own hit. Sullivan was very angry. People were moved by Diddley's raw energy and famous beat. A lot of Americans the first time I heard that catchy Bo Diddley beat. Even though it changed rock and roll for good in just 2 minutes. As soon as the cameras stopped, it made Sullivan mad. He yelled at that kid. Based on what Diddley and Sullivan even said he was the first black boy to ever double-cross him. That was an awfully racist comment. He had pushed for black artists in the past, but here he showed his bias and anger. The fight was very hot. They were being held back by staff. The fight almost turned into a brawl. Diddley meant to hit Sullivan. His boss tried to calm him down. "That's Ed Sullivan," the boss said. It didn't bother Diddley. Sullivan told him he'd never work in TV production again. "You won't last 6 months," Sullivan lost it. Diddley was told he couldn't come back. People loved Ed Sullivan. A lot of money on TV, but his daughter Betty has told a very different story. She said her dad was known for having a short fuse that could blow over small things. Ed was calm in public. Cute and nice. He was quick to get angry when he was alone. Betty remembered an event at home that began with a small argument and finished with Ed yelling and slamming doors. Family and friends learned to be careful when they were near him. They had no idea what would make him angry. He didn't show this anger very often on screen. Behind the nice smile that everyone had, it stayed hidden. New. But at home, it was real, and the people who loved him had to deal with it. Every day on this uncertain side. Betty also said that Ed wasn't at all like how he acts in public. People thought he was friendly and open when the cameras were off. The truth was that he was very shy. He liked to hang out with people. By yourself. He didn't party or talk with friends after a show. Instead, he often hid in his changing room. He could read the newspaper or watch TV for hours at home. Watching TV in silence. This wasn't a short-term feeling. It was just how he was. Of being. That difference between how people see a friendly host and the man's private world was so strong that even the people who worked with him sometimes thought he was cold or distant. Something bad was also there. His fears when the Cold War was at its worst. She told a story about Ed, becoming more and more sure that her boyfriend supported communism. It took place sometime in the late 1950s or early 1960s, when people were afraid of communism. Was all over the United States. Ed asked Betty a lot of questions about the boy's past. He thought about kicking him out of the house. He even went to other people and asked for help because he thought his daughter was got mixed up with a rebel. It was a false assumption with no any proof at all. Even someone like Ed Sullivan, who openly backed civil rights, and let African American performers appear on his show, but he couldn't get away. How crazy people were at that time. Ed was also careful with his feelings. His grandson, Rob Precht, said that Ed didn't show up very often. Love or talked about how they felt. Rob thought Ed put on this emotional mask to cover up pain. Ed lost both a twin brother and a sister when they were babies. She was young and went away. Because of these losses, he was careful about how he felt. Even when he was an adult, he kept a straight face and didn't say anything. Rob had this idea this was one of the things that made Ed seem cold to strangers and even some family members. But he seemed tough, but inside he felt more than he could say. It was part of what made him who he was and how he dealt with the stress of being famous. The same, he also had problems with artists because of the tension between how he looked in public and how he behaved in private. The Doors were going to play live on his show on September 17, 1967. Show. These people told them they had to change a line in Light My Fire before they went on stage. They were after they took out the word higher because they thought it meant drug use. The band said yes and agreed during practice, telling the producers what they wanted to hear. But for sure, Jim Morrison told them they wouldn't change a thing once they were out of the room. The rest of even though they were scared, the band stood by him. Robert Kager, a guitarist, said after that, "I thought they were kidding. I told them, fuck it. Let's do it that way." They didn't give up, so they did it. The show was live that night. Ed asked them to play and was polite as always. They played one song and then started into millions of people watched Light My Fire on TV. At the exact same time, in a very important moment, Morrison sang, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." The crowd loved it, but things were very different backstage. The producers were there was anger in the room, and Ed Sullivan himself came in after the show. Witnesses said he was very angry and yelled at them, telling them they had broken the show's trust. The network. The band was told that none of their future shows would happen. When someone told them they would never play on the show again, Jim Morrison didn't care. He famously replied, "But we just did." That one sentence said it all about the band. It didn't matter that they were on one of the biggest stages in America, they stayed true to themselves. Even after all these years, that moment is still talked about in interviews, documentaries, and the Rolling Stones were on the Ed Sullivan Show on January 15, 1967. Sullivan Show. They were set to sing their new song, "Let's Spend the Night Together." But the show's makers in CBS thought the title was too suggestive for family TV. They told the band to change the words or not go on at all. Under pressure, the Stones agreed. They sang, "Let's Spend Some Time Together," instead. It was a big deal at the time. American television was strict and they thought the original lyrics were too rebellious. Even though the Stones agreed, they weren't happy. The episode became popular. It showed the fight between rock music and TV censorship. It also showed how much power television had over artists. Radio stations followed suit. Many of them bleeped the word night or they wouldn't play the song at all. That hurt the song's success in America. On the other hand, the UK didn't care. The song wasn't banned there. But even then, the Stones had a radical image. People already knew them for pushing limits. Their controversial lip sync on Sunday night at the London Palladium added to their fame. The Ed Sullivan moment stayed in everyone's thoughts as one of the most famous censorship battles in rock history. During the show, Mick Jagger wanted to make a point, so every time he sang, "Let's spend some time together," he made a small move toward the camera and rolled his eyes. It was seen. He meant them to be sarcastic with his eye rolls.